I was driving home from my Tuesday morning meeting when I saw her. My daughter was sitting on the curb outside a glass office building on Meridian Avenue, her 3-year-old son pressed against her side, both of them surrounded by 2 large cardboard boxes and a tote bag that had tipped over, spilling a coffee mug and a small framed photo onto the sidewalk. She wasn't crying. She was just staring at the pavement like someone had taken everything familiar out of the world and replaced it with something she didn't recognize. I pulled over before I even realized I'd made the decision to stop. I rolled down the window and called her name. She looked up, and for just a moment, something crossed her face relief. Maybe. Or the particular exhaustion that comes right before tears finally arrive. Then she pulled herself together the way I'd watched her do since she was 7 years old, squaring her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly. "Mom," she said. "What are you doing here?" "I had a meeting 2 blocks down," I said. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you inside? Where's your car?" She looked at the boxes on the ground. Then she looked back at me. "I don't work here anymore," she said. I got out of the car. My grandson ran to me immediately, wrapping both arms around my legs and pressing his face into my coat. I held the back of his head and looked at my daughter over the top of his curls. "Tell me what happened." She took a breath. Then she told me. My daughter had been working at Whitmore Premier Properties for 2 years. Her husband's family owned the firm. His mother had founded it 30 years ago, built it from a single office on the east side of the city into one of the most recognized residential real estate brands in the region. When my daughter married into that family 4 years ago, her mother-in-law had offered her a position personally, Director of Client Relations. It was real work. My daughter was good at it. Genuinely good. The kind of person who remembered every client's children's names and followed up after every closing just to make sure they were settling in. Her numbers were strong. Her client retention rate was the highest in the office. 3 hours ago, her mother-in-law had called her into the corner office, sat down across from her, and told her that her services were no longer needed. She said the firm was going in a new direction, my daughter told me. Her voice was measured, careful, the way it gets when she's trying not to come apart. She said they needed to think about brand consistency. She said clients at this level expect a certain presentation, a certain background. She said I was lovely, but I wasn't. She stopped. She said I wasn't the right image for the Whitmore name. I was quiet for a moment. She said our family's background was a liability, my daughter continued. That her high net worth clients asked questions. That people talk. She glanced down at my grandson, who had moved to examine a crack in the sidewalk with great concentration. She said she'd already arranged for HR to process my final check. There was a security guard waiting outside the office when I came out. They walked me to my desk, gave me 15 minutes to pack. I looked at the tipped-over tote bag. The coffee mug was one I'd given her last Christmas. It had a small chip in the rim now from hitting the pavement. "Where is your husband right now?" I asked. "In a meeting. He doesn't know yet." She looked at me steadily. "And before you ask, he didn't know this was coming either." "I don't think he did." I picked up the tote bag and set it upright. I put the coffee mug back inside carefully. I picked up the small framed photo. It was a picture of my daughter and her husband on their wedding day, laughing at something off camera. I handed it to her. "Let's get these boxes in my car," I said. "Then we're going to get lunch, and you're going to let me buy your son a grilled cheese. And after that, I'm going to tell you something I probably should have told you a long time ago." She looked at me with the particular expression she'd had since childhood, the one that meant she knew something was coming but couldn't read what it was yet. "Mum," she said slowly, "what are you not telling me?" "Lunch first," I said. "Help me with this box. I have always been a private person. My own mother raised me that way. She used to say that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful one, and that there's wisdom in letting people underestimate you, because the moment they stop watching you carefully is exactly when you can work without interference." I took that to heart young, and I never really let go of it. I built my first investment while I was still working as an administrative coordinator for a property management company in my late 20s. I'd been watching the way the numbers moved, the way certain kinds of commercial leases appreciated over time, the way nobody paid attention to the industrial corridor on the south side of the city because it wasn't glamorous. I used my savings, everything I'd put away over 6 years, and I bought a small commercial lot down there that everyone else considered a problem property. It wasn't a problem. It just needed patience. That was the first one. By the time my daughter was born, I owned 3. By the time she started high school, I owned 11. I had incorporated quietly, operated under a holding company name that didn't connect back to me in any obvious way, hired a management team I trusted, and kept my personal life entirely separate from the professional one. I drove a sensible car. I lived in a nice but not extravagant house, in the kind of neighborhood where people mowed their own lawns on Saturday mornings. I sent my daughter to public school. I didn't talk about money. I did this partly from instinct and partly from hard experience. I had learned early that the moment people know what you have, they stop seeing you and start seeing an opportunity. I preferred to be seen. My daughter knew I'd done well for myself. She knew I had investments, that I consulted, that I had what she called business things that kept me busy during the week. She knew I was comfortable. She didn't know the full scope of it, because I had never seen a reason to lay it out for her. I didn't want her to carry the weight of it, and I didn't want it to change the way she moved through the world. She had built her own career, made her own choices, married the man she loved. That was what mattered. But there was something else she didn't know. 18 months ago, Whitmore Premier Properties had begun pursuing the largest deal in the firm's history. A developer was planning to build a mixed-use luxury complex on the western edge of the city, 40 acres, premium residential units, high-end retail, a hotel. The listing rights for that development would be worth more to a real estate firm than anything they'd handled before. My daughter-in-law had been working the connection for over a year. She'd flown to conferences. She'd hosted dinners. She'd restructured her entire pitch around the project. What she did not know, what she had no reason to know, was that the development company behind that project was a subsidiary of my holding company. I had been the one who approved the project. I was the one who would ultimately decide who held the listing rights. I hadn't made that decision yet. I'd been taking my time, watching how different firms handled their business, thinking carefully. It was 40 acres. I was going to get it right. When my daughter told me what her mother-in-law had said on that sidewalk, not the right image, our background is a liability. People talk. I sat with that information through the entire lunch. I watched my grandson eat his grilled cheese and tell me very seriously about a fire truck he'd seen on the way to school. I drank my coffee and listened to my daughter explain, in the careful way she does, that she wasn't sure what came next. I thought about a woman I had never particularly liked, not because of anything dramatic, but because of small things I'd noticed over 4 years. The way she spoke to restaurant staff. The way she asked my daughter, at family dinners, about her background in the tone of someone filing information for later use. The way she had, on 3 separate occasions that I could recall, referred to me as my daughter's mother, in contexts where my name would have been the natural thing to use. Small things. But they accumulate. "Mum," my daughter said, watching me. "You have your thinking face on." "I do," I said. "What are you thinking?" I set down my coffee cup. I looked at my grandson, who had moved on from the grilled cheese and was now arranging sugar packets into a pattern that clearly made sense to him. "I'm thinking," I said, "that your mother-in-law is about to have a very significant professional disappointment, and I want to make sure you understand everything before that happens, because it's going to come out regardless, and I'd rather you hear it from me." My daughter went still. "The Alderman West development," I said. "The big project she's been pitching for. She's been working on that for over a year," my daughter said slowly. "I know," I said. "I own the development company." The sugar packets stopped being rearranged. My grandson looked up at me and then at his mother, sensing something in the air the way small children do, then went back to his arrangement with the philosophical adaptability of a 3-year-old. My daughter sat across from me for a long moment without speaking. "How much?" she finally said. "Have you not told me?" "Enough that this conversation is going to take a while," I said. "But the important thing right now is that I need you to trust me, and I need you to let me handle this in my own way. Can you do that?" She looked at me for a long time. Then she exhaled. "Does Daniel know anything about this?" "No one in that family does," I said. "And that's exactly the problem." I called my attorney that same evening. My attorney is a woman who has worked with me for 19 years and who has, over the course of those 19 years, developed an almost preternatural calm in the face of whatever I put in front of her. I explained the situation. She was quiet while I talked, asked 2 clarifying questions, and then said, "So you want to formally redirect the listing decision?" "I want to formalize the decision I was always going to make," I said. "I was planning to make it anyway. The timeline has just become more relevant, And your son-in-law's family firm was one of the candidates. They were, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Were, she repeated. The decision is mine to make, I said. And I've made it. She asked me a few more questions about how I wanted the communication to be handled, what documentation I wanted prepared, and whether I wanted to be present when the formal notification went to the competing firms. I told her yes. I told her I wanted to be in the room when Whitmore Premier Properties received their answer. She paused. That's unusual. I know, I said. Another pause. All right, she said. I'll set it up. In the days that followed, I watched things unfold the way you watch a slow tide coming in, certain, unhurried, inevitable. My son-in-law came home to find his wife had been let go from his family's firm, and he was, by every account my daughter gave me, genuinely blindsided. He called his mother. The call did not go well. He came to my daughter the next morning and said, in plain and unambiguous terms, that what his mother had done was wrong, that he had told her so, and that he was not going to pretend otherwise to keep the peace. My daughter called me after that conversation. She was crying a little, but in the good way, the way that means something has been set back in its right place. He said she had no right, my daughter told me. He said he's been watching her do this for years with people she thinks aren't up to her standard, and he's done looking the other way. I was glad to hear it. I had always thought my son-in-law was a decent man who had spent a long time under the gravitational pull of a very controlling parent. Sometimes it takes a specific moment to find out which way a person is actually going to fall. The notification meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. My attorney had coordinated it through the development company's official channels, a follow-up presentation session, ostensibly to discuss the final stages of the selection process. The representatives from Whitmore Premier Properties arrived in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown. There were 3 of them: my daughter's mother-in-law, her business partner, and a junior associate who had the particular look of someone who had been brought along to take notes. I arrived after they were already seated. I watched the moment register on my daughter's mother-in-law's face. It was brief, a flicker of recalibration, the kind that happens when the context of a room changes faster than your understanding of it can follow. She knew me, of course. We had sat across from each other at Thanksgiving tables. We had made polite conversation at my grandson's birthday parties. She knew me as her daughter-in-law's mother. A nice woman, background unspecified. Not the right image. I sat down at the head of the table. My attorney sat to my left. The director of my development company's operations sat to my right. The junior associate from Whitmore began writing something in her notebook, and then stopped. "Good morning," I said. "I appreciate you coming in." My daughter's mother-in-law had composed herself by then. She was good at that. I'll give her that. She was the kind of woman who had spent decades performing unruffled confidence and had gotten genuinely skilled at it. She smiled at me with the careful courtesy she had always used in my direction, the kind that holds a person at a precise and comfortable distance. "This is a surprise," she said. "I wasn't aware you had a connection to the Alderman West project." "Most people aren't," I said. "That's generally by design." I let that sit for a moment. "I want to be straightforward with you," I continued, "because I think you're an intelligent woman, and I don't see any reason to be indirect. The Alderman West listing rights are mine to assign. They have always been mine to assign. And I've made my decision." The business partner shifted slightly in his chair. The junior associate had stopped writing entirely. "The listing rights are going to a firm called Caldwell & Associates," I said. "They've been selected based on their track record, their team's approach to client relationships, and the way they conduct their business on every level of the operation." I watched my daughter's mother-in-law process this. The calculation behind her eyes was almost visible. "I see," she said. Her voice was even. "May I ask what factors led you away from Whitmore? We've invested considerable time in—" "You may ask," I said. "But I think on some level you already understand part of the answer." She looked at me directly for the first time that morning. Really looked at me. "3 days ago," I said, "you sat across from my daughter in your office and told her she wasn't the right image for your family's brand. You told her our background was a liability. You had a security guard walk her to her desk, and you gave her 15 minutes to collect her belongings." I kept my voice entirely calm. "She was sitting on the curb outside your building with her son and 2 boxes when I drove past." The room was very quiet. "Now," I said, "I want to be clear that those 2 things are related but not equivalent. I was not going to give Whitmore this listing regardless of what happened with my daughter. I had concerns about how your firm operates that predate this week, but I also want to be honest with you about the full picture, because I think you deserve to understand exactly what happened here and why. My daughter's mother-in-law said nothing. The performance of composed confidence was still there, but it had gone very thin at the edges. You made a decision about my daughter based on where she came from, I said. You decided her value to your firm, and implicitly, her value to your family was determined by something she had no control over, and that has nothing to do with the quality of her work or the quality of her character. You've been making that kind of assessment about people for a long time. I've watched you do it. I paused. I'd like you to spend some time thinking about what that's cost you, not just here. Today. Over the years. She found her voice then. She stopped. Started again. You're telling me that because of a personnel decision, an internal business matter, I'm telling you, I said, that decisions have context, and the context of your decisions over time is what I'm responding to. I stood up. My attorney will send over the formal documentation this afternoon, I said. I wish you well with the firm. I genuinely do. I looked at her one more time. I hope your son and my daughter work things out. I think they will. He's a better man than this week gave him credit for being. I picked up my folder, nodded to my attorney, and walked out of the conference room. The drive home took 25 minutes. I spent most of it thinking about my mother, who had worked as a hotel housekeeper for 22 years, and who had, despite that, or perhaps because of it, carried herself with a quality I could only describe as sovereignty. She never explained herself to people who had already decided what she was. She just kept moving, kept building, kept watching for the right moments with a patience that I had tried to inherit. I thought about what she would have said about the week I'd just had. I thought she probably would have told me I'd handled it well enough, and then reminded me to call my daughter, and then asked whether my grandson had enough warm clothes for the weather. I called my daughter from the parking garage before I drove out. She picked up on the second ring. How did it go? She asked. It went, I said. A beat of silence. Mom, it went well, I said. It went the way it needed to go. I heard her exhale long and slow, the particular exhale of someone setting down something heavy. She called Daniel already, my daughter said. 20 minutes ago. I don't know exactly what she said, but he came and found me, and he was. She paused. He held my face in his hands and he apologized. He said he was sorry it took him this long to really see it. He was crying a little. I sat in my car in the parking garage and let that settle. Good, I said. He wants to come see you this weekend, she said. He wants to talk to you himself. He's welcome anytime, I said. He knows that. Mom, she said again. And this time her voice was different, softer, with something underneath it that was working its way toward words. Why didn't you ever tell me? About the business, about how much I mean. I knew you'd done well, but I didn't. Because it was never the important part, I said. You were always the important part. What you built for yourself. The kind of person you are. That was never about what I had. She was quiet for a moment. I'm proud of you, I told her. I've been proud of you since you were 7 years old, sitting on that curb with a split lip from falling off your bike, telling me very firmly that you did not need a Band-Aid and that you were fine. You were not fine, incidentally. You absolutely needed the Band-Aid. She laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded. I remember that, she said. You've always gotten back up, I said. That's all I've ever needed you to know how to do. We talked for another half hour. About what came next for her professionally. She had options, real ones, and we walked through a few of them. About my grandson, who had apparently spent the morning explaining to his father at considerable length how grilled cheese sandwiches were made. About my son-in-law, who was, by my daughter's account, doing the particular kind of hard thinking that changes a person for the better when they're willing to do it honestly. When we finally said goodbye and I hung up, I sat alone in the quiet parking garage for a minute or two. I thought about the security guard walking my daughter to her desk, the 15 minutes, the tipped-over tote bag on the sidewalk, and the coffee mug with the chip in its rim. I thought about the look on a woman's face when the room she walks into is no longer the room she thought it was. I thought about my mother, making up hotel rooms on the 11th floor of a building she never owned, watching everything, learning everything, passing that watching and that learning on to me in every quiet, precise, unhurried way she knew how. I started the car. The drive home was easy. The afternoon light was long and flat and golden the way it gets in October, lying across the streets like it had nowhere particular to be. I drove at my own pace, unhurried, listening to the radio. There is something my mother used to say that I have carried with me for 40 years. She said it simply, without drama, usually while she was doing something ordinary, folding laundry, or standing at the window with her coffee, or walking with me to the corner store on Saturday mornings when I was small. She said, "Just keep building, baby. Don't make noise about it. Just keep building." I had tried. I had kept building for 35 years, quietly, steadily, one careful decision at a time. I had built something real, and the most important thing in it, more important than any property or any contract or any conference room, was a woman who had sat on a sidewalk with her son, and her boxes and her chin lifted, waiting for what came next. She came from exactly where I came from, and that, as far as I was concerned, had always been more than enough.